And what a year it's been. I don't think anybody expected the Pittsburgh Penguins to not only make the playoffs, but to really most of the season sit in second place. It's been an interesting year, and the year is now over, and we have all of this stuff that's coming up. So I wanted to thank you for joining the Sin Bin Hockey Podcast. I am your host, Jeff Canarsie, and we're going to jump right into the Pittsburgh Penguins. Your 25-26 Pittsburgh Penguins finished the year 41-25-16 for 98 points and entered the 25-26 NHL playoffs against the Philadelphia Flyers, and they lost that series in the first round. There's a lot to talk about, and this isn't going to be in any necessary order. Let's begin with the offseason and in-season moves that Penguins general manager Kyle Dubas made with this roster. So what worked, what didn't, and where do we go from here? And with that, we're going to get right into it. So the key additions, the 2025 offseason. They signed Anthony Mantha for 1 year, $2.5 million. Justin Brazeau, 2 years, $2.5 million. Parker Wotherspoon, and the RD Party, Arturs Shilovs. We drafted Ben Kindle. We signed Bill Zonin, who had a fantastic Game 1 last night against the Thunderbirds. Great player, big, speed, good hands, and put the biscuit in the basket for the Baby Pens last night. And Will Horkoff as well. We signed Taylor Gauthier, acquired Connor Dewar, acquired Sam Girard, acquired Stuart Skinner and Brent Kulak, and removed Tristan Jarry. We acquired Igor Chinikov from Columbus for a 26 second round and a 27 third round. And we acquired Elmer Soderblom from Detroit for a 2016 third round pick. And so I wanted to look at a couple of stats really quick. Anthony Mantha came in really sort of on the downslope. Let's be honest. For a guy that's 6'4", 6'5", he should really be playing in front of the net. And we saw the majority of the season that Anthony Mantha got a lot of those garbage goals in front within 10 feet of the net. He finished the regular season with 33 goals, 31 assists for 64 points and a +10. However, in the playoffs, he was a no-show. And that is really what Anthony Mantha got away from. And that's what the Pens got away from the first 3 games against the Philadelphia Flyers. They had almost zero net front presence. They relied way too much on defensemen attempting to skate the puck out from behind their own net over through center ice. But what Philadelphia did to negate that was played a 1-3-1 and clog center ice. And it wasn't until Game 4 that the Penguins finally figured out that they needed to jump and chase. That's how they would be able to sustain any sort of offensive ability. But if you look close, they stopped playing the front of the net. Anthony Mantha disappeared in the playoffs. Igor Chinikov, 21 goals, 21 assists, 42 points. He was a -2. He also, as well, disappeared in the playoffs. Justin Brazeau, 17 goals, 17 assists, 34 points, +5. Disappeared towards the tail end of the regular season, and I believe appeared in only one playoff game. Ben Kindle, the rookie, 19 goals, 18 assists, 35 points, -5, also as well. Pretty much absent in the playoffs, which I kind of expected. Parker Wotherspoon, 3 goals, 27 assists, 30 points, +17. Connor Dewar, 14 goals, 16 assists, 30 points, +16, 2 points in the playoffs. Elmer Soderblom, 7 goals, 6 assists, 13 points, -1, and the handful of games that he played with the Penguins. Now, I don't want to focus totally on each player's stats, and I'm not a big fan of Corsi for a lot of different reasons. Corsi has its place in statistics. However, there's other intangibles that are a little more pointed, I think, than Corsi, and it's called your eyes and understanding the game. And so when we look at the Penguin season in its totality, a lot of surprises, right? I mean, I think Kyle Dubas added some sandpaper. I think he added some players that definitely helped. This would be a different story if the players like Connor Dorr or Ben Kindle or Brazeau or Mantha, if they did nothing all season, then this would be a very different discussion today. But Kyle Dubas, some may say that he got lucky. He made the right choices and it had all worked out for the Penguins. And there is some truth to that. But also at the same time, I think Kyle Dubas understands talent. He sees something in players they don't see in themselves. And that is the greatest difference between Jim Rutherford and the way he continued to deal with things and the way that Kyle Dubas does. So like I said, I don't want to focus totally on each player's stats, but the best defenseman we had all year really came down to Erik Karlsson and Ryan Shea. Karlsson, 15 goals, 51 assists, 66 points, +8, 3 points in the playoffs, was a leader. He had 3 points in the playoffs, but he was -4 in those playoffs. Conversely, if you look at Ryan Shea, 6 goals, 29 assists, 35 points, and +30. Ryan Shea truly was the pinnacle of the defensive core this season. He played well. Karlsson had a great year, offensively speaking. And it's going to be interesting going forward to see if the Penguins actually re-sign Shea. And we'll get into that. What Dubas added, obviously at this point we know helped. And I want everybody for a second to take into consideration that for the last few seasons prior, the Penguins had, a little depth, but not like they do now. We had 4 lines that worked all season this year, and they put pucks in the net. And it's been a long time since we've seen a Penguins team firing on all cylinders like that. The last 7 years, it's really been 2 lines doing all of the grunt work. Now we have, or at least last season, 4 lines that were contributing. If one guy went out of the lineup, it wasn't a concern because somebody could step up and you knew they were going to provide offense. That has not happened for this team in a long, long time. But just because you make additions that help for one season, I caution you very carefully because that's not going to happen a second time. And so how do you encapsulate everything without going, player by player? Well, simply, I'm not going to. We all watch the games. We know who stood out and who didn't, and who disappeared and who didn't. And there are 3 major questions I think that a lot of Pens fans are asking. And those questions are, number 1, going forward, does Dubas add or subtract? And what can we expect moving forward? Number 2, is Evgeni Malkin coming back or not? What are the pros and cons of that? Because yesterday, Kyle Dubas had a presser, and he said 3 different things, and they were all very different things. And over on our Facebook page, Pens Vlog Post, Kennedy Club, I did post it sounded a lot like Malkin was coming back. However, later on in the day, watching the rest of the presser, I'm not convinced that's really the case. And the third question is, hard cuts are necessary to get better. So who's leaving this team and why? Or can or will they re-sign anybody? Well, number 1, just after the season ended, they re-signed Connor Dorr and Alexei Solyov. They're small signs, they're depth signs. And Dorr's going to continue to, center that 4th line next season. And Solyov is going to end up being, if anything, a 7th pairing defenseman. He's the guy that's going to be coming in and out of the lineup. However, I will add this, that I think that he has a physical element to his game the Penguins need. But I think that physical element versus some of his shortcomings are the reason why he's going to end up being a 7th pair defenseman. But we'll see, going forward. But going into the offseason, the Penguins have roughly $46 million in cap to spend. We have 8 players who are either free agents or restricted free agents, and those are going to include Chinakhov, Mantha, Hayes, Nola Chari, Connor Clifton, Ryan Shea, and Stuart Skinner. And I believe that Artie Shilovs is as well a free agent. So let's address question number 1. Going forward, Does Kyle Dubas add or subtract? And what can we expect leading up to draft day and draft day itself? Well, number one, we have to understand that Kyle Dubas currently has the 22nd first round pick overall, and a few second rounders and a couple of third rounders, and the list goes on and on and on. Dubas's plan for the draft is going to depend on the draft depth after the 10th pick. It's not often a 22nd overall first round pick plays in the NHL. So I do think that there's probably going to be a strong push from Kyle Dubas to do two things before the draft or during the draft. Number one, he's going to try and trade up into the top 10. I believe that's what he's going to, even the top 12. I think it would behoove him to do that. I think we have the draft picks and sort of the surplus where we could legitimately trade for a top 12 pick. Because there are going to be teams that are going to say be 17th pick, 18th pick in the first round. And the Penguins will gladly take somebody that's like pick 12 and say, okay, we'll take your pick 12. We'll give you X, Y, Z, and you're going to get pick 22. They're still getting their first round pick. Plus they're getting something coming back their way for facilitating that. I do expect Dubas to try that. I do think that's going to be sort of his motivation. I don't think necessarily that there is anything outside of the top 14, the first 14 picks that are going to be juggernauts. So that's why I think Kyle Dubas is going to try to make that move. Doesn't mean it's going to happen, but I certainly think he's going to try to do that. I also think at the same time, albeit the draft or when free agency opens on July 1st, I think he's going to accept bad contracts in return for draft picks. He did this last year. He did this in Toronto. I think this is the objective way he's going to go about business. And I think that's the way that this is all going to kind of come down. Now, do I see anybody being traded at the draft? If it is, it's going to be for the exact situation I just explained to you. It's going to be Dubas wanting to move up into the draft, and that is probably going to cost him Rickard Rakell. I'm just going to say it. I'm not saying that I think that's what Dubas's intentions are going to be, but that's a player that you could move to utilize that, but then you have to replace said player. So there's no easy way around this, but if anybody can do it, I do believe it's Kyle Dubas. Now, going past that, the question becomes, how can Kyle Dubas move up in the draft without crippling one of the top two lines? Because like I said, if you remove a Brian Rust, if you remove Rickard Rakell, what are you going to be bringing back? That top 10, top 12 pick isn't going to replace Rickard Rakell. So you have to have a plan for bringing somebody else up. And that's why I said this gets a little dicey. But the answer to the question is going to come in the form of a couple of different scenarios, right? I would expect Owen Pickering to be dangled. I think, and this is all going to hinge on, I think, what Dubas, how Wilkes-Barre ends their playoffs, how well Pickering is or plays during these playoffs. I think there's just going to be a lot of things that are going to be decided after Wilkes finishes their season. But I do think that of all of the prospects we do have that could fetch a first round that wouldn't cripple this team, I think somebody like Owen Pickering would be a guy that you would look to move, especially with Harrison Brunick playing so well down in Wilkes. But like I said, this is going to get into some X's and O's here as well. I could see a position. Listen, I will be honest. I'm not a fan of Rutger McGroarty. I don't think he's as generational talent as he's been touted. I do think that Rutger McGroarty is going to end up being a third liner in the NHL. I don't see him as a second line player, but yet I do see people like Tanner Howe being a second line player. So it's just the difference being is I'm not using Corsi. I'm looking at what I'm actually physically seeing on the ice. I've never been impressed with Rutger McGroarty. I'm still not totally impressed with him, but I would also like to see him get a year in the NHL to see what he can do. And I think next year is going to be the year for him. And I think it's going to be for Pickering. It's going to be their opportunity to come into camp and blow away Dan Muse and the coaching staff. If they don't, they're going to end up back in Wilkes. And if that's going to be the situation where Owen Pickering's going to go get buried in the AHL again, maybe you need to start thinking outside of the box a little bit. Just my opinion. But you could move into the top 10 just by dangling Pickering. You really could. I think if you dangle McGroarty or Pickering, of the two, I would dangle Pickering a lot quicker than McGroarty. But I think that if you use, say, Pickering, McGroarty, and somebody like Raquel or Rust, you're going to get that top 10 pick. You're going to get that top 12 pick. But I don't think Dubas is going to be willing to give up a ton of that for a 12 pick that may not be ready to play in the NHL for 5 years. So that's why I think this is just going to be very interesting to see how he does things. Also, you have to look at the reality of their age, right? I mean, the direction that Dubas is headed, losing Pickering or McGroarty isn't going to handicap the Penguins at all down the line. It may haunt them for a bit, but it only haunts them if Pickering comes into the NHL and puts up like 80 points and is plus 50, but he's not going to do that. It's just the reality. He's not that type of player. But if you want to get younger and you want to add stock, you do so by doing stuff like this. However, the problem you have is, based on the press conference from yesterday, it sounds a lot like Dubas is going with the same shit that he went with last season, the same sort of lineup. I don't think it's going to be completely the same, but like I said, we'll get to the portion of the show where we discuss what Kyle Dubas had to say, and I think it's worth noting that there could very well be potential for a massive, horrible PR problem again. And we'll get into that when we start talking about Malkin. But anyway, let's move forward a little bit. Like I said, I think McGroarty is a little bit overhyped, just my opinion. And Pickering is a good prospect. He's not Harrison Brunicky. He's not Harrison. He's just not. And I would be in favor of Dubas doing that if and only that top 10 pick or that top 12 pick is at least going to benefit this team now. Not 5 years from now, not 6 years now. That's the only reason why you would do that. Because McGroarty and Pickering, I think, are right on the cusp. They're right on the cusp. And if you're going to give up a player that's right on the cusp, then the player coming back or the draft pick has got to be inserted immediately. That's the only way that this works. So yeah, Dubas is going to try to trade up, and it does make sense. I can also see Dubas moving some of those picks for extra picks, meaning he might dangle a second-round pick and a prospect for a top 6 forward under 26. That is going to be what Kyle Dubas is looking for. He's looking for young players with term that aren't breaking the bank, that are almost overproducing in a sense, and if they're not overproducing, then they're underperforming. And those are the players that Dubas looks for. This is why Connor Dewar, Connor Clifton, Witherspoon, this is how some of these players ended up in Pittsburgh. And I think that that's going to be the plan going forward. And I think that's the direction that Dubas is headed. I just don't think there's going to be any difference. Another facet to all of this is the plan that Dubas may have preceding the NHL draft. Dubas is not going to swing to the fences. Anybody thinking he's going to go after Austin Matthews or Jason Robertson or any of those players, he's not. Number one, the Pens can't afford those because the return going back we can't afford. We don't have anybody we can hand them that is going to make an immediate super duper impact with Dallas. And I'm going to tell you right now, any top 6 winger the Penguins try to target Ben Kindle, they're going to want Ben Kindle to go back the other direction. And Dubas is not about to do that. So the Penguins, in one hand, they have some prospects, they have some draft picks and et cetera, but they don't have a particular prospect that is going to fetch. Raquel for Jason Robertson is not fair. It's not going to work. You would see something like, to get Jason Robertson, you're talking multiple draft picks, at least a first-round draft pick in the top 10. You're probably talking about a prospect that's ready to play in the NHL and probably a role player to some extent. And Dallas is going to get whatever they want. So the Penguins aren't in a position to compete with Toronto. They're not in a position to compete with these other teams that have the ability to actually stockpile and move things to acquire a trade. Not that Toronto has a whole lot of depth when it comes to that, because Toronto's... Well, we'll see how Toronto plays out after Gavin McKenna gets drafted and how well they're able to play going forward. But I think reality is, for the Penguins, If you're expecting them to go out and sign a Tarasenko or an Austin Matthews or a Jason Robertson, don't count on it. It's not going to happen. The only way something like that can happen, the only way is if they're a completely free agent. If they're restricted, the Penguins have no opportunity to get involved because no matter what the Penguins dangle, the team that owns the rights is simply going to qualify them. Okay, so this idea that they're going to run out and buy like all these big top six players, it's just not going to happen. It's just not going to happen because you're going to end up forsaking the very thing you've tried to accomplish the last 2 seasons. And I just don't see it being a valuable commodity for the Penguins to do that at this point. If they were going to do that, last offseason would have been the year to do it. And if you look at the free agency, I encourage all of you, go to NHL.com, look at the free agents for this summer. There's not a lot out there. There is almost nothing out there that I would go, oh my God, you got to sign him. And that's sort of the position that the Penguins are in. Like I said, Kyle Dubas is going to keep the standard of I want players that are underperforming somewhere else, that have term and have some youth and are, youthful, good in the locker room and quick. Speed, right? So moving on from that, listen, will he try to swing for some of these players? Listen, he might do it. Kyle Dubas might find a way to try to swing for the fences and try to acquire Matthews. He might swing and try to acquire other players in the league. The reality is, though, you just can't afford to acquire them. You don't have the right parts to facilitate that. So we have to let players like Austin Matthews just slide and go off our radar. I would rather have Jason Robertson than Austin Matthews. I'm not convinced that Austin Matthews is a leader. I'm not convinced that he's a playoff performer. And with his age, I'm just not going there. I'm just not going there. But I'm telling you what, it's going to burn Toronto's ass something fierce. I mean, look at what happened with Mitch Marner. He goes to Vegas and he's leading the league in the playoffs. That's got to burn Toronto's ass something fierce. However, if you look at the top 6 players in the Penguins organization, and this is a big deal, right? All of this youth movement, the Penguins have been one of the oldest teams in the NHL for the last 7 years, and not much has changed. I think they went from an average 2 seasons ago to an average age of 34.6. And with all of the youth that has started to come into Pittsburgh to some extent, you would think, based on that the Penguins would be, at least to some extent, a lot younger in terms of overall youth on this team and the league minimum age and all of this kind of stuff that we see going on. But the reality is the Penguins didn't get much younger. I think the Penguins went from 34.5 to 33.1. So they lost a little bit of age, which is good. They got a little younger, but I just don't think it's enough. I just don't think it's enough. And the Penguins are going to have to try something different. They're going to have to try something different because you can't have your top 6 players with an average age of 33 years old. You just can't do it. You look at some of the most successful teams. They have a couple of players in their mid-30s. They may have one that's north of 35. But for the most part, a lot of these successful teams are very young. They have like an average age of like even 30 would be considered, young. But a lot of these other teams have a minimum age of 25, 26. And a team that's top 6 has the top 6 players are past the age of 33. You got to get younger. And that simply means hard choices and decisions are going to be made. Another facet to all of this, I think, is you just have to accept that next year may not be much different. In fact, this team may not be as good next year as they were this year, and that has a lot to do with the bottom 6. It has a lot to do with the bottom 6. So the expectations for this season were not the playoffs. But the expectations are if we will, or if we can, or if we do make the playoffs, we have to get deep into the playoffs. Not just the first round, but the third round. They're not here just to show an appearance. And so that's why things I think are going to change. And so where do we start? Well, number one, Anthony Mantha, you got to let him walk, right? You have to let him leave. He disappeared in the playoffs, and he took a lot of criticism from other players in the locker room for not playing to his 6'5" frame. Because if you're 6'5", you need to play like it. You need to park your ass in front of the net and get the garbage. He's got hands. He's a good player. But he's not as good as his stats have suggested. And this happens all the time in Pittsburgh. How many times have we seen a player come in here who can't put up 20 points anywhere else, puts up 60 here, wants a ton of money, goes somewhere else, and you never hear from him again. And then and they never ever reach that sort of ability again. And a lot of that comes because you're playing with Sidney Crosby and Evgeni Malkin, Ricard Raquel, Brian Rust, Erik Karlsson, and the list just goes on and on and on. Playing with people that are better than you make you a better player. And I'm not knocking Anthony Mantha, but I don't think he is nearly as offensively talented as his stats from this season suggest. Remember, happens all the time. Guys play with with Gino and Sid. They get more ice time, and somehow it works out, right? But it always seems to be when they're on a one-year deal. And listen, we've seen Jim Rutherford and others, and other managers prior to him, ineptly re-sign these fucking guys. And I could go down a list of people that Rutherford signed and gave huge deals to for no other reason than they had one good year. And I agree, you reward guys, but he rewarded them with like long-term contracts and more money than any other team in the league would have given them. And so the reality is guys who put up 30 points a year are going to get $4 to $5.5 million a year, at least now in today's 2026 NHL. A couple years ago, forget it. You're talking $1 million, if that. Now, guys that are putting up at least minimum of 30 points are getting almost 4 to 5 to 5.5. I've seen 5.5 in some deals. And Mantha, at 32 years old, is going to get 4.5 to 5 per season this summer because of his season in Pittsburgh. And I've been, honest about saying the Penguins should not pay him anything close to that. I wouldn't, and I don't think Dubas is going to. And the only reason why Anthony Mantha was not traded at the deadline last year, because that would have been the perfect time. He's putting up all these fucking points. Surely an NFL playoff team would want somebody like Anthony Mantha. He's big. He's got hands. He can score. The problem with that is he was at his most value and his peak-wise right before the trade deadline. And the only reason why Dubas did not trade him was the Penguins were bound to make the playoffs. If the Penguins had been out of the playoffs, believe me when I tell you, Anthony Mantha would have been traded quickly. And so the real work here is going to be in the depth of this team. Your third and fourth line have got to continue to contribute. They have got to be fast. They have got to be young. And as well, the Penguins' needs are many, despite how well they did actually play this season. Defensively, they have got to get better, and they have got to figure out the net situation. So let's start with what this team immediately needs. So what are the Penguins' needs? There's many. There are many, many, many needs for this team. It's not just one thing. We need forwards with youth and speed. I mean, that's just number one, right? Ben Kindle was fantastic. And I said, after the fifth or sixth game I think he played this season, I said he's going to put up close to 40 points. And that eventually I think he's going to be a 50-goal scorer. And a lot of the Pens beat writers laughed at me when I said that. He's never going to do that. We know hockey. Well, here's the problem with Pens beat reporters. None of them have ever played hockey. None of them have ever played at the level I played. And I don't think any of them ever played at a level other than rec league. And I'm not knocking their acumen. They're highly intelligent writers and stuff like that. I just think the problem is, having never played the game, there are certain intangibles you just can't get no matter how much tutelage you go under. It's just one of those things. And I think with each team, and I say this all the time about the Penguins have probably the worst PR, NHL-wise, as far as social media. It's some of the stuff they post is childish, it's gimmicky, it's like fanboy stuff. And I think that you do a disservice to your fans when you continue to try to put a silk head on a pig. And I get it. And I understand you're a beat writer. You work basically for yourself, but with the organization. So there's certain things you have to do. And I understand that. I just think that Pittsburgh, just like Philadelphia, are the two worst teams at being homers in this league. It's just unbelievable how that goes down. And that's not to say anything negative about beat writers, or I just think that they have a tendency to try to gloss over things that shouldn't be glossed over. And that's just the truth. And I think really, truly, the only Pens beat writer, and I don't even want to call him a Penguins beat writer because I don't feel like that's what he is. The only reporter that I think does sort of get it is Dan Canarsie. 100%, I think Dan Canarsie gets it. I don't think he's always right. I think sometimes he steps on his toes a little bit, especially with this Malkin stuff the last couple of days. But I give him a lot of props, and I'm going to tell you why. Because he's the only one that had the nerve to say it. He's the only one that had the courage to say, I don't understand why you would bring Evgeni Malkin back to this team for any other reason than nostalgia. Because it does nothing for this team leadership-wise. It may not do anything for this team offensively. And we're going to get to all of this when we talk about Malkin, but I give Dan credit. Dan came out, he spoke his truth, and almost was literally crucified for it. We need more reporters that are like Dan. I don't always agree with Dan. I really don't. Especially when it comes to him critiquing players' skating styles. Dan, nothing personal, but unless you've ever played hockey at a professional level, semi-pro level, then you really don't understand that. Physically watching somebody skate, you can get some ideas of those players. You can get some ideas of how they flow, the ebb and flow throughout the game. But saying someone is, and I'm not putting words in anybody's mouth. I'm using an example. When somebody says something like, oh, he skates horribly. He may skate horribly, but he also put 50 goals in the net. And nobody's going to mention anybody's skating abilities as long as they're producing. And that's sort of my thing. There is a huge gap, and I don't think people understand. There is a huge gap between the East Coast Hockey League, the American Hockey League, and the NHL. Huge gaps. There are certain types of players, and I'll get back to the point here in a second. There are certain types of players who surpass everything at the East Coast Hockey League level, right? And they get into the AHL. It's a little quicker. It's a little rougher. It's a little more physical, depending on which division you're in. And the difference between the NHL and AHL is there's a huge difference. But there are some players who just are better than every ECHLer. They get to the AHL, and they're a mid-range AHL player, and they never make it to the NHL for whatever the case may be, right? So I think in terms of, it goes back to my point of, I'm not looking for somebody to browbeat the Penguins. I'm not looking for somebody to browbeat Sidney Crosby. I'm not looking for somebody to browbeat Evgeni Malkin or Kyle Dubas or really anybody. I'm looking for truth. I'm looking for someone to put themselves out there and say, okay, from a franchise standpoint, from a fan attendance standpoint to the fan base standpoint, I totally understand it. But from purely a hockey perspective, I don't get it. And that's exactly what Dan said. And I agree with him. And I fully agree with him. There needs to be more Dans covering hockey and less Josh Yohe's. Just being honest. Just my opinion. Just my opinion. Anyway, Like I said, I don't want anybody to take umbrance. I don't want anybody to think I'm saying anything awful about Dan. I like Dan. He's a little too snarky for me sometimes with the people that come into his chat rooms. And I think a lot of the problem with that is I think Dan's got a very dry sense of humor. And I think what he thinks is funny doesn't come off funny. And I think that it's almost rude the way that some of these fans are treated when they're asking simple questions. And I understand Dan's frustration with that, especially considering that I've covered organized crime for a decade. So yeah, you get the same questions every time and you're just like, Jesus Christ, how many times am I going to be asked the same stupid question? And I get where he's coming from, but some advice, because I've been podcasting for over a decade successfully, is you have to treat each fan like they're children, and you have to treat each fan like they don't understand the game that well. And I'm not saying you dummy it down for them. Not at all. What I'm saying is you have to understand that not everybody watches or reads your stuff. So not everybody's familiar with your point of view, your take on things. And so rather than getting brash and getting kind of snarky with them, stop, breathe for 3 seconds, Dan, and just take into consideration that they may not have ever heard you before. They may be new. They may not understand hockey the way you do. They may be coming from a very visceral fanboy mentality. So you have to be patient with people. Now, by all means, don't be patient with a Philadelphia Flyers fan if they're going to come in your chat and start talking crap. By all means, don't put up with that. But you're going to attract more bees with honey than just not being nice to people. And I'm not saying you're not being nice, but I just think that you're a good guy. It's very obvious you're a very good guy. You're a very intelligent guy. It's very obvious to me you understand hockey incredibly well. And I think you understand hockey from a management perspective better than most people that cover the Penguins. I will give you that all day long. But come on, cut some of the newbies that go into your chat a break. They just don't know, Dan. They just don't know. And you have to always assume, Dan, they don't know anything. Always assume they don't know anything. I get it. I understand the frustration. I'm right there with you, pal. But this is just the nature of the beast that you have jumped into. Anyway, so moving forward past that, guys like Noah Chari, they've been great in a role that is specifically designed for them. But when you start sort of looking at this roster, and let's look at it honestly, it's pretty grim below the second line. Guys like Hayes, Brazeau, Achari, even Tommy Novak, to some extent, are guys that should walk, will walk more than likely. And losing either Brazeau, Achari, or Novak isn't going to kill this team. Yes, there are small, minuscule little things that Noah Achari does in and out every single game that may not appear to you visually as doing something, because often, and I'm not going to try to lop hockey fans into one category here because it's just not fair to do. It's not fair to stereotype anybody. But I think that a lot of American fans that are casual fans, they don't know what icing is, let alone they can't understand why you would put a fourth line out against a first line. And so when you have fans that don't have that sort of acumen, of course they're going to bitch about Noah Chari. Oh, he put up 5 points. Why are we wasting $3 million a year on this guy? It's because they don't see the small intangibles that Noah Chari does on the ice. So the question becomes, are those intangibles that Noah Chari has, could you find those in another player? Absolutely. And you might be able to find a player who is just as physical as Noah Chari, but has a little more offensive output. And so rather than being a singular threat, now you're a double threat. And those are the types of decisions I think that Kyle Dubas is going to have to make in order to change this up. Even if you simply sort of replace two of them with younger, faster guys who have more offensive capabilities, then that's a huge upgrade, right? That's a huge upgrade, and it's an inexpensive upgrade. And that's what Kyle Dubas is doing. So offensively, you have to add likely another winger or another center. Let's be honest. You're probably going to be looking for a singer, Mel Torme, anybody. You're going to be looking for a winger, a center, and a defenseman. Those are really going to be the three areas that I think that the Penguins have to focus on, because you got to have depth on that front end. You got to have depth on the back end. But defensively, this is where the Penguins have a lot of problem. Chris Letang, a lot of people on our page dislike Chris Letang, have for a long time, or just think that he should have been put out to pasture already. I think, listen, there's a lot of arguments for that, right? I think Chris Letang has been through hell physically. What has he had? 2 strokes and God knows all sorts of other health issues. Listen, is Letang still viable? Not for $7 million a year, he's not. Not for $6 million a year, he's not. Do I think that Letang is a 1-2 defenseman anymore? No. I think he's a second pairing defenseman on that second line, being the second defenseman or the third defenseman. But I don't think that he's any longer a first pairing defenseman. A lot of Pens fans are going to argue with me about that, but you have to split him and Girard up. You have to, because him and Girard, realistically, the only difference between the two of them is the size. Because I think Girard's quicker than Letang. I think Girard has better hands than Letang. But Girard plays a lot like Letang. And when you put two of the same identical players on the ice together, you sort of get this schizophrenic, here's the best way I can describe it. When I was playing defense, when I was playing hockey, and I was a defenseman, okay? I was a right side defenseman. Anytime the coach was doing the lineup, it's called offsetting. You're going to put a left-handed shooting defenseman with a right-handed stay-at-home, because the left-handed guy is going to be the offensive defenseman who's going up and in and out of the zone, in and out of the zone. You're the right-side defenseman, so you're the guy they count on, that when the puck's coming back out of the end, you're going to be able to get back and help on D. That was sort of my position. And then there were games where it would be reversed, and I would be the right side, which was the offense, and the left side would be the stay-at-home. So you always want to offset players. The weird thing that I think Dan Muse did was he put Letang and Girard together knowing that they would almost overplay that opposite side. They would overplay. So if Letang gets beat, Girard knows in the back of his mind, okay, Chris is probably going to get beat coming out of this zone, so let me go from the right side of the ice towards the center to the left to try to overflow and give him some help. And what happens? Boom, the puck gets chipped up the boards and the team goes right around the defenseman, and it leads to a breakaway. That is the problem they had all year. But I give Dan Muse a lot of credit because he refused to separate them. He says, nope, they're going to figure it out. They're going to get it together. And I personally thought that Sam Girard had a rough start. I think he had a couple of great games in the playoffs. But is he the answer? I don't know if he is. I just don't know if he is. But of the two of them, I think, once Girard starts to settle down, I think he's really going to be the guy that's going to drive the power play. And he should be. I don't know if I agree with Letang being on the power play anymore. Maybe second unit power play I don't have a problem with, but not first unit. I just think you need a lot of speed up there. And I think one of the problems with this power play towards the end of the season, because they were great all year until the end, was they stopped doing the small things that help them score goals. Cycle around the net. Crosby down low. Crosby down low. Crosby up to the top of the circle. Back to the point. Across to the other side of the point. Back down below the fucking hash marks. And there's nobody in front of the net. If you look at the regular season, they always had two big bodies right in front, screening all night long. Or Brian Rust would even screen. They stopped doing that. And that's why the power play failed postseason. All right. So that's another thing they have to adjust. But as far as Chris Letang, you're not killing the team by keeping Chris Letang in this lineup. You're just not. But you can't give him 21 minutes a night on the ice anymore either. You just can't. Malkin shouldn't be playing but 14 or 15 minutes a night. And you have to make adjustments on special teams. Like I said, Sam Girard started he came here, he started shaky, but by the end of the regular season, he looked okay. In the playoffs, he had I thought he was in the top 3 defensemen we had. I think he personally does a lot of stuff down low too much. In other words, he has no problem skating it out because he's got a tremendous amount of speed. But because of his size, he gets bumped off the puck a lot. And that's a problem. You can't have a defenseman all the way in the opposite end of the ice in the offensive zone playing around with the puck in the corner and getting buried and losing the puck every time. That consistently happened to Sam Girard. His size is going to be an issue. I think in terms of just the way and the style he plays. He's not a tall guy. He's not a big guy, but he plays like he is. The problem is he's getting steamrolled by players that are bigger than him. And that can't happen to a defenseman in the offensive zone, because then when the puck comes back around and the breakout starts, you get burned. And that's what leads to these 2-on-1s, 3-on-1s, and et cetera, that the Penguins had a problem with this season and the season before. The season before, it was even more ridiculous, but they got better. But like I said, I think you have to split Letang and Girard going forward. You just ultimately have to. So a problem that Kyle Dubas is going to face, and we talked about it a little bit at the top of the show, was a lack of free agents that fit the narrative. You know, young, speed, with term, that's acceptable. And that means, like I said, high-end players are not going to come to Pittsburgh. And where I deviate from Kyle Dubas's thinking is that with $45 million, you can add a decent young winger who can score. You just have to be creative in how you approach it. And you also have to consider you're removing players like Mantha and Brazeau. So you're losing over 60 points in scoring by removing those two players. And that's why it makes any move that Kyle Dubas completes a dice roll to some extent. You don't know what you're going to get. A guy could put up 50 here and then nothing at another team. And this is why everybody who has said and will say that this team, given the parameters of what Kyle Dubas is looking for, are not going to be a Stanley Cup contending team anytime soon. Those are just the facts. And a lot of this is going to hinge on, and I don't think a lot is, whether or not the Penguins play well next season is not going to hinge on whether or not Evgeni Malkin is back in the locker room. Okay. However, there's a side of hockey that is business, and there is a side of hockey where a guy just makes you comfortable being in the room. And I don't think that any of this Malkin stuff should affect the team positively or negatively, but it's going to. And so we're going to talk about the pink elephant in the room. Evgeni Malkin is going to be 40 years old at the start of this season. He's coming off a 61-point season, plus 13. If you can actually believe that, Pens fans, he was plus 13, which meant he played a good defensive game, or he was out there enough when they scored to offset it. But it's been a long time since Malkin's been plus in anything. And he's still averaging over a point per game at 39 years old, which is absolutely insane. His last deal, 4 years, $24 million, 24 and a half, I think. And if we look at what 30 points per season gets a player financially, that's between $4 and $5 million a season. And so Malkin getting $6.1 million isn't really that big of a deal. But we're also talking about a player who's slowing down and who's going to be 40 going into next season. And so there's two arguments that you're going to hear of when you think or you talk or you research Evgeni Malkin that seem to be pivot points for writers and hockey pundits galore. And what the first thing you hear is that Malkin was a point per game. And that is true. He helped lead in the playoffs this season with 3 points in 6 games. He is a part of the core. The second argument you seem to get is that given the price and his output and what's available due to free agency, he's really only the Penguins' really best option for a 1-year deal at 4.5 or 5. And those are all valid and true arguments that people make. Nostalgia is a great thing. Nostalgia is just fantastic. But nostalgia should never be a reason to sign a player. Point blank, full stop. And what Malkin has given to the Penguins franchise is absolutely insane. He's a first ballot Hall of Famer. You can't take that away from him ever. However, all of that being said, you have to let Malkin walk. And I get the feeling that Dubas' thinking here is about free agency and what they might be able to add if Malkin goes. And if Dubas was 100% confident in Malkin and wasn't going to deviate from this season, then Malkin would have been re-signed for 1 year already. Just to avoid the drama, they would have already re-signed him. It's not the price that Malkin's going to want, because I guarantee you they're not going to give him a big offer. If we believe everything Kyle Dubas said yesterday, which we'll get into. You know, Malkin's not going to get the $6 million or the $5 million he wants. And his agent output, in the reality that he's 40 years old, he's likely not going to put up 60 points ever again. That's just the reality of age. Father Time is not kind to anybody, and it gets everybody. The reality is this about Evgeni Malkin. He's slow. His defensive liabilities were on full display during the playoffs. He could be 3 points plus one, whatever the hell it was in the playoffs. Maybe he was plus 3 in the playoffs. Either way, the same mistakes he's made for the last decade has been the same thing. Stupid penalties, lazy, slow, lethargic defense. You know, all the key traits that have annoyed Pens fans for the last decade. But the fact that he was plus 13 during the regular season is astonishing to me. And if you look at the Penguins roster, at least for the playoffs against the Flyers, not many Penguins had pluses. Most of them were negative. And sure, from a fan perspective and an ownership perspective, I get it. Malkin sells seats. He sells jerseys. He puts fans at the arena, PPG. He's got name recognition. And that's why I feel like this issue with Evgeni Malkin is going to be threefold. You have what Crosby wants, you have what ownership's going to want, and then you're going to have what the fans want. And obviously what the owners want will dictate most likely what's going to happen. But if they let Dubas do as he wants, unfettered, I don't think Malkin's coming back. And I also think that perhaps there's a situation where Letang is asked this offseason, do you want to go play in Montreal next year? Do you want to go play anywhere else? I think that's coming. And I'll tell you why I think that's coming when we get to the press conference. Well, by letting Evgeni Malkin walk, what's the greatest loss? Well, you're going to piss off Crosby. You're going to upset the fans, but the fans will get over that relatively quickly. In fact, they'll boo the shit out of him the first time he comes back to Pittsburgh. I guarantee it. Maybe not. Maybe not. But the problem is that you lose Malkin, you're losing 60 points of output. Even let's say last year was a crescendo, a curtain call for Malkin. I still think he's going to put up a minimum of 40 points next year. So if you're going to remove him, you better replace it. Does he deserve to walk away with ovations from the Pens fan base? Absolutely, 100%. He has earned that right. But Dubas should have considered that last offseason. But I think that he was waiting to see what Malkin could do in the regular season. And I think he was waiting to see what Malkin could do in the playoffs. And I think based on that, you're not killing the team by bringing Malkin back for a one-year deal. And I'm okay with it. But you have got to move Malkin down to a third line winger position, or he has got to be removed from the power play, or he's got to have less minutes and less responsibilities. That is the only way I would do it. He can no longer play 21 minutes a night, and he has to be removed from the point on the power play and push him down low, because his back skating, he's slow anyway. He doesn't play good defense. Why are you leaving him high on the point? Because he's going to get burned 9 times out of 10. And we watched it all season. Because if you're going to rely on a 40-year-old to back skate defensively, you are asking an awful lot from Evgeni Malkin. You're asking an awful lot of him. So if you're going to bring him back, bring him back. Don't pay him much. Maybe you make it incentive-laden, which is what I would do for Malkin anyway. Because Malkin likes to prove himself. Okay, fine. We're going to give you a $4.5 million one-year deal. We'll give you $1 million in bonuses. How about that? If he doesn't reach them, you're not going to pay him. But you also had to explain to Evgeni, you are no longer going to play 24 minutes a night. You're no longer going to play 21 minutes a night. You're no longer going to be on every special team that we have. There may be some nights you don't dress. That just may be the reality of where we're headed. But if you're going to resign the guy just to sit him for half the games, why even bring him back at that point? There's no reason to do that. There's no reason to do it. You bring Malkin back because he helps, not because it's nostalgic. He's still, listen, at 40 years old, he's still a good player. Not many 40-year-olds are putting up the numbers he is. A point per game. But the reality is, I don't think he's going to do that next year. He's no longer a juggernaut. Neither is Letang. You know, the reality that we're facing here is Crosby and Malkin are going to wind down sooner rather than later. Crosby, was 17 points behind where he was last year. 17 points. Yes, he was hurt. We understand that. But this is nature's course. Malkin hasn't put up north of 70 points since 2019. He also averaged 17 minutes and 36 seconds of ice time this season, which is 2 to 3 minutes less playing time, but we adequate that to like injuries and missing time, suspension, and etc. You can't have a 40-year-old playing 20 plus minutes a game. You just can't. Is he still the guy with a minute left in the game that I put on the ice as a sixth player? Absolutely. I would do that. But I think you have to redefine what his role is. And I don't know if Malkin's capable of accepting that. That's going to be the problem. So if it were me and I'm going to keep him, you're going to play from 14 to 17 minutes a night, if that. You're no longer on the power play. You're no longer going to be put in a position where you're a defensive liability. And I'm going to move you down low. You're not playing on the point anymore. Because the reality is you're going to get beat going back anyway. I'm not putting myself into that position or asking Sam Girard to overflow because we know you're going to get beat. This is not about trashing Evgeni Malkin. It's about just accepting the fact that the guy's 40-some years old. The fun ends, ladies and gents. The fun ends. Malkin offers you nothing in terms of leadership because that's fallen on Rust, Carlson, Crosby, and others. And Evgeni Malkin's not a leader like that. He has swagger. He has those abilities. But we have to be realistic. Most fans clamoring for Malkin to return. I just want to ask you a simple question. Would you be okay if we re-signed Evgeni Malkin for 1 year at $4.5 million and he gets hurt 2 weeks into the season and is done for good? How would you feel then? So can you understand the narrative or the perspective that Kyle Dubas is looking at? Hey, we got lucky. Malkin didn't break anything this year. But at 40 years old, you break down pretty quick. So you're going to pay him $4.5 million, and 2 weeks into the season, he's done for good. Or how about we pay him $4.5 million and he just has a crap year and is horrible, like -20. Then what? Pens fans will be the first ones booing him out of the building, screaming, get rid of him. The same ones that are clamoring for Kyle Dubas to sign him now are the same ones who are going to call for his head to be cut off by the guillotine in downtown Pittsburgh outside of PPG if his season's crap. I mean, what are you going to do then? What are you going to say then? Sure, we're playing with a lot of different options and scenarios here. But in reality, that's closer to the truth of what's probably going to happen than not. That's what you risk by doing this. And I tell you why you bring him back. And this would be the only reason why I would even consider it. Because there is nothing on the market that can compete with what Malkin could possibly do. In other words, he's more affordable for his output. And then you just hope he can put up 40 points. So the whole idea here is, okay, we're going to sign a 40-year-old. Hey, most people making this kind of money, $4.5 million, are putting up at least 30 goals, 30 points a year. As long as Malkin gets 40, then we haven't wasted our money. But you got to hope on that. If Malkin was 26, nobody would be saying hope. They wouldn't be saying if, they would be saying when. And the question really is Malkin the difference maker? Adding him, is that going to change? No. It's not going to change. He's not the difference maker and hasn't been for years. And like I said, fans will clamor for him to be traded. If re-signed and he doesn't put up numbers, trade him. And that's how the Penguins fan base sadly works. Malkin at his age and where this team sits, that's a complimentary piece you add midsummer to round out your squad. Not one you make mid-season when a guy is 40 years old. And to be frank with you, I don't know if this ends well for anybody. Crosby's going to be upset. And understandably so if Malkin walks. But Dubas gave them a shot. He didn't trade anybody for the last 2 years that hurt this team. He gave them their shot, and they failed. Let's just be honest. They failed. We can argue whether they had enough talent or not. But what the hell's the point in arguing that now? The season's over. Malkin is no longer the centerpiece of this franchise. And like I said, if Dubas makes some additions and then decides in, say, late July to sign Malkin after making additional moves, fine. I could care less. You know, Malkin wants to be a priority, but he's not. That's the problem. Malkin thinks he deserves to be a priority. And unfortunately, the NHL is not about this. They're all about nostalgia. But at the same time, let's just be realistic here. And what my gut kind of tells me here, my gut the other day after the first 10 minutes of the press conference told me, Dubas is going to bring back Malkin. But the longer I watched, I started to hear something a little different. Because truth be told, Dubas is going to look at the market. He's going to make adjustments where he needs to, but he's not going to rush out to re-sign Evgeni Malkin. And I expect most likely in the next 2 weeks, I think we're going to know exactly what's going on with him. Because I don't think Dubas is going to stretch this out. I say that, but there's also a part of me that thinks that the way that Dubas kind of said some things the way he did, this may be like ugly. But I would think that Dubas wouldn't want to do this again. Like last year, the year before, or whatever. Because, you know, stuff like that is negatively going to affect how the fan base feels about Dubas. Even if I think it's a stupid way to feel about it, there are fans that are going to feel that way. And so yesterday, Dubas had a press conference. End of the year, he talked about a bunch of different stuff. Obviously, Evgeni Malkin was brought up. And he really, I thought, was honest. He said, look, we want Evgeni Malkin back. He's certainly welcome to come back here. And we'll continue to talk to Evgeni Malkin's agent. And that's as not clairvoyant. That's as clear as I can be about it. So in other words, he's saying, yeah, sure, Malkin can come back. We have no problem with that. And then later on in the press conference, something odd happened. He was sort of asked another question about Letang and Malkin, and he kind of came out of left field and says, look, I'm not going to allow Evgeni Malkin or Letang or anybody to hold up a spot if younger players are ready to play on this team. I put Letang and Malkin in the same box physically. So you got to read between the lines with Dubas and what he's basically saying, because he went on to say, listen, some guys are going to sit. Some guys are older. They're going to have to take extra days off. Like it's the geriatric hockey team or whatever. But the way I took that as, that was Kyle Dubas saying, sure, publicly, outwardly, he's saying the right thing here. Yes, we'd love to have Evgeni Malkin back. We got to work out the arrangements with Malkin's agent. I think is Barry or JP Barry or whatever his name is. But that is the cliche general manager opening line. Sure, we'd love to have him back, but, you know, we got to cross the I's or dot the I's, cross the T's, and make sure, you know, the money works out for us. But he basically came out left field and said, you know, we may bring somebody back, but this idea of no trade clause shit, it's not going to happen again. This idea that you're going to play 80 games just isn't going to happen again. And so I think if Kyle Dubas presents Evgeni Malkin with, we'll pay you 4.5, 1 year, but I'm just telling you right now, there are going to be games you're scratched. You're not going to play on the second line. Your power play numbers, minutes are going to be limited. He's almost going to put pressure to make Evgeni Malkin walk. If you want to play here, these are the parameters. This is what you're going to do. If this doesn't interest you, by all means, you can go somewhere else. And I think also probably what's being very clearly made to him is that if we re-sign you for 1 year, there is no trade clause or it's limited. Because I just don't think there's any way that Kyle Dubas is going to bring him back and give him the same sort of carte blanche he got last year. It's just not going to happen. And I could also see a sort of thing in place where Penguins next year come out, they play okay. Maybe they're playoff bound, maybe they're not. And I could see where the Penguins would trade Malkin. 100% I could see that's the way that's going to go down. But I think the way this is probably going to shake out, and I'm just being honest, is I think Kyle Dubas said everything that he needed to say professionally, publicly yesterday. But then he sort of dovetailed that by saying, sure, the idea is a novel idea. He had a good year physically. He came back. He played well. Kyle Dubas is basically laying it out there of he can use the excuse coming down the line. Like, let's pretend Malkin says, oh, there's just no way I'm going to play on the third line. There's just no way I'm going to. So then Kyle Dubas says simply to the public, hey, listen, we sat down with his agent. We tried to reach, a deal. We just can't make one. I'm sorry. That's the way this is going to end. However, what's going to make this very weird to me and very weird to everybody is if this drags out till August. I don't think it's going to, because I think pretty sure Kyle Dubas has laid out exactly what they're willing to give Malkin. And Malkin obviously gets an opportunity to counter, to negotiate, but I don't think there's going to be much room for him. It's going to be, do you want to finish your last year of your career in Pittsburgh or not? These are the parameters, accept or not. If not, enjoy your career. And that's the way that Kyle Dubas should be with this. He really should. He really should. He really should. But I think he's making a great point, and that tells me that he's reading what Penguins beat reporters are talking about, especially Dan. I know Kyle Dubas is reading his articles because Dan made a point a few weeks ago. And maybe it wasn't a few weeks ago. Maybe it was like closer towards the end of the first round, where Dan, I think, and I'm just paraphrasing. I don't want anybody to call me and say, that's not exactly what he said. I'm paraphrasing. That he basically just said, if you're going to continue to bring guys like Malkin and leave guys like Malkin and Letang on this roster, what the hell is the point of keeping Rutger McGroarty, Harrison Brunick down in the AHL? Because they can't come up as long as these guys are there. And I think the fact that Dan made that point of saying, why would you allow Evgeni Malkin to take a roster spot when you have somebody down in Wilkes who can put up 30, 40 points, whatever the case may be, and isn't 40 years old? And I think that's a very valid point. And it tells me that Kyle was reading those articles because Kyle made a very strong point of, look, if you guys think for 1 second we are going to allow a 40-year-old to take up a roster spot of a kid who's ready to play, you're out of your mind. This is not going to happen. And that's also, I think, a wide shot at Crosby and anybody else who, I don't want to, it lets Crosby and them know time is done. I'm going to do what I got to do. I've given you two chances, the last 2 seasons to do stuff. It hasn't panned out. I've got to make decisions. I'm sorry. It is what it is. That's basically Dubas putting Crosby on notice that this is likely what's probably going to go down. And I think that Malkin really speaking to the press, complaining about not getting a contract, just looked bad. It just, there are certain things as a player you wait and deal with after the season. And, the fact that when Malkin was asked, well, would you go play somewhere else before they could even finish the question? Yes, absolutely. And that was a shot at Dubas. Okay, well, you don't want to talk to me. I'll just go play somewhere else. But Evgeni, you're 40 years old. You're not a commodity anymore. Doesn't mean you just still don't have value. But this is just a real mess that can get out of hand. And I hope that Kyle Dubas handles this as at least a different way. Like I would hope before the draft that they've already decided what they're going to do with Malkin. Because I don't want to be on Malkin watch all summer. I just don't. If Malkin was 26, okay, yeah, I'll spend all these sleepless nights wondering what they're going to do. But he's 40 years old. You know what I mean? So we'll see how that ends. So the other part of the issue the Penguins need is goaltending, right? I don't think Stuart Skinner's coming back. I think Stuart Skinner was a great player. I think the fan base liked him. But let's be honest. He played steady in the regular season. Nobody can complain. The playoffs, very shaky, right? And the Penguins were shaky too. But I thought that Artie Shilov's is the better of the two. I think you have to let Skinner walk. And I don't think that was the narrative of Kyle Dubas before the playoffs. I really don't. I think Artie Shilovs came in and just stole it from Skinner. The fact that on say goodbye day, clean out your locker day, Skinner refused to even speak to reporters. And I think that's kind of going to tell you where they're headed. I think the thinking prior to the playoffs was that Skinner would probably sign a 3-year deal and he would probably likely back up Sergei Murashov next season. And I think that was the plan until game 4 of the Pens Flyer series. Everything changed. The fact that Murashov is killing it in the AHL says a lot. He's ready. And I think that come September, late September, early October, I think the net is going to be either Artie Shilov's to win or Sergei Murashov's to win. I don't think that Dubas is going to let Shilov's walk at this point. There's no reason to. He played well. The only thing that might change is if Dubas thinks he can acquire somebody better than Artie Shilov's. That may be a little bit, I wouldn't even say younger because Shilov's is not old, but maybe some term, who maybe has a little more NHL experience, who could help Murashov, usher in a little bit better, but there's no reason to. I think Artie Shilov's is a good backup. And I think that's the only way that Artie Shilov's does not come back to the Penguins is if the Penguins just let him walk. And I don't think they're going to do that. The only way they let him walk is if there's nothing on the market. And there really isn't. Go look at the market yourself. So what are the musts? Well, you got to re-sign Chinakhov. He's an RFA coming off, I think, 2.5 per. He's going to get paid, bottom line, and he should. They're going to dangle a 4.5 to 5 year deal per. That's what he's going to get. And that's he's doubling his earnings. And even signing him for 4.5 to 5 at a 4-year deal, it's not going to hurt you. I don't think Dubas is going to go. I don't think Dubas will sign anybody for anything more than 4 years. I just don't think he's going to do it. Not like Rutherford. Oh, let's give Johnson 7 years. Yeah, he's only going to play here 2 and suck for 5, but fuck it. Let's just do it. That was Rutherford's way of doing business. I think Chinakhov has deserved it. I think he's earned it. But I'm also going to put this little happy asterisk out there for you guys. Just because Chinakhov played well this season does not mean it's going to transpire to next season. It's just the truth. But I do think that the Chinakhov's going to sign anywhere from a 3 to 4 year deal, 4.5 to 5. Ryan Shea, this is where it's going to get interesting. I personally think you've got to re-sign him. I think he was one of your best defensemen all year. He's coming off a 1-year deal at $900,000, and he's going to get paid. Make no mistake. He's 25. He's in his prime. He's coming off a great season, and he's going to get a 3-year deal, at least 2.7 to 3.5 per. Easy. So, and, we need right-handed defensemen. The Penguins all got lefties. They need righties, right? And so what about that free agency? Well, if you look at the free agent market, there's really nothing that jumped out at me. The top 10 in free agents have an average age of 34 years old. That's something you're adding to push for the playoffs, for the Stanley Cup, not something you're just looking to fucking add for a regular season for a year. It's not going to do you any good, right? And the youngest of that bunch is Jason Robertson from Dallas, who's 26.8 years old. And the salaries average out to $8.3 million. That's crazy per year. And when you look at the list, the only players that jumped out at me were Jason Robertson, who's going to make $12 million a year on his next deal. So take that off the list immediately. Trevor Zegras. First of all, I can't stand Trevor Zegras. Never liked him. I know the Penguins brass did not like him. There was a lot of talk that he just had ego problems. He'll resign in Philadelphia, I'm sure. Let his ass stay in Philadelphia. Past that, Connor Bedard? He's 20 years old. He's an RFA. You're never going to get him. He's coming off a $4.4 million a year deal. And he's going to get north of fucking 8 at this point. Maybe 7. But like I said, he's an RFA, which means Chicago at the end of the day can match whatever they want. They can qualify. If it were me, I'd be looking at guys like Andrei Kuzmenko. Yeah, he's 30 years old. And he's coming off a $4.3 million per year deal, and he only put up 26 points. He is a left wing, but it's not a risky move. And his offensive output from last season, while it's really not all that fantastic, might actually bring down his salary a bit. And I think a guy like Kuzmenko could fit in well on the Pens as a reclamation project. And you might be able to get him for a 1-year or a 2-year deal at, 3. Well, he's not going to take less than 4. So you start at 4 and go to 4 or 5. And even at 4 or 5, I would kind of feel weird about paying somebody to play, that only got 26 points. But if it's a reclamation project, It's not that much money. But I would not budge over a 2-year deal or a 3. I just not at 30 years old. Maybe a 1-year, 2-year deal. But that's probably not the best fit. But when you consider removing part of the bottom 6, when you lose guys like Achari and some of these other guys, that just means you're paying Kuzmenko less per year because you're removing other guys off your roster. That's why I can justify the 4.5. Because technically you're going to get rid of 3 guys probably, so you're going to save probably $1 million there. So really you're only paying 3.3 a year for them because anyway, you guys know where I'm going with that. Charlie Coyle, that's another guy, right? I've always liked Charlie Coyle. I've always thought the Pens could use a guy like Charlie Coyle. He's a big guy, right? But this is a move you make 4 years ago, not now, because Charlie Coyle is almost 35 years old. He's coming off a $5.5 million deal. Granted, he put up 60 points. Listen, maybe he's not Anthony Mantha, so to speak. And maybe he's a little bit more expensive, but I think he has more offensive talent than Anthony Mantha does. I'm just being honest with you. I think he's a good replacement, a relatable replacement. But he wouldn't be my first pick, obviously. But ultimately at 5.25 at 35 years old, listen, I am not opposed to picking up a guy that's 34 years old. But once again, if you're Dubas, what are you trying to acquire by grabbing? Because I heard a lot of Pens fans screaming, get Coyle. He's 35 years old. Like he's going to be 35 going into next season or halfway to that. What are you really doing? I mean, if it's an Anthony Mantha-like move and you sign him for 1 year, okay, who gives a shit then? But that's not a guy you're going to sign for 3 years. And these were like the Kuzmenko and the Coyle are like at the top of the list of free agents, and that's as good as it gets. And those are just a few simple ideas, not to say that they're deals that you run out and grab and try to do immediately, but those are just for example purposes. Other than, say, bottom 6 help. What this team lacks is defensive depth. Letang is, days of 24 minutes should be over. Is he still a 1-2 pairing? No, I don't think so. I think he's a second line defenseman at this point. Gerard, who started shaky, like I said, ended much better. He's a smaller, quicker version of Letang in many different ways. The two cancel each other out often when they're on the ice. So you have to take them away from one another. But the issue for this team is the lack of right-handed defensemen. So Dubas can pull from Wilkes-Barre, right? Obviously. But I'm looking for more of a first and a third round pairing D, albeit free agency or a trade. I'm not going to run down those lists of names. We're not going to do that today. But I think because, say, Brunick and Pickering and et cetera are coming into next season with mostly playing in the AHL, they're going to get a serious look. And that's why I don't think Dubas is going to go out this summer and sign any major name. I just don't think he's going to do it. But obviously, part of the premise here is, let's say Harrison Brunick comes up. Let's say Pickering comes up. Let's say Bill Zahn and Tanner Howe come up. Well, you still have to replace all those guys in the minors, which means you're going to use draft capital to look for younger players. And this is what Dubas has done for 2 seasons now. But I think, listen, I can see a situation where we re-sign Shea and Brunick is ready. And then Dubas maybe says, you know what? Brunicky's probably going to come up and play here next year. We re-sign Shea. I tell you what, let's go on the market and let's sign like a $1.2 million, 26, 27, 28-year-old defenseman. Because if anything, Kyle Dubas's mojo tells us that young players are coming. But it's going to depend on so many different factors. We're not going to be able to nail it down today. And so you need depth in the top 6. And defense is where the Penguins need the most help. And that's where Dubas will make subtractions and additions, as well as defensively, too. I do think he's going to try to trade up at the draft. Don't be surprised if there's a trade at the draft. But I don't think Dubas is going to do that unless it's something he really wants. I just don't see him doing that. But we'll see. We'll see. And I definitely think that Dubas is going to accept bad contracts for draft capital. He's shown an ability to do that the last 2 seasons, and I don't think that's going to change. So overall, it wasn't a bad season. We saw a lot of it, right? Dubas made some really good decisions. And it's good to finally see somebody other than Rutherford, who we called Lumpy. We called him Lumpy Rutherford over on our page. Nobody was a fan of Rutherford. But Dubas made good decisions and they paid off. But here's something I want all Pens fans to understand. Do not expect that twice in a row. General managers are crafty, they're smart, but at the end of the day, the player still has to perform, right? You can give them the greatest surroundings, the greatest teammates, the greatest amenities, the greatest doctors, but ultimately, at the end of the day, they still have to tie their own skates and go out and play. So you're not guaranteed anything. But where Dubas' strong point is recognizing things that other teams don't. And I think until Dubas wins the Stanley Cup, until Dubas has 4 or 5 years of a franchise just kicking ass and taking names, then that Toronto shit's going to haunt him. It's going to haunt him. It's just the truth. That's just the truth. But I think Kyle Dubas is finally in a position because Toronto was run like an oligarchy. He couldn't make decisions without the people on the board voting for this, voting for that, saying yes to this, yes to that. So rather than Dubas just picking up a phone and saying, hey, Jim, Rutherford, I want to trade for Elias Pettersson. What do you got? This is what you're offering. This is what I offer. Sound good to you? Okay, let's do it. Dubas didn't have any of that ability. And I don't think, I'm going to be real honest with you, I don't think Dubas had that ability last year under FSG either. I think it was very much an oligarchy telling them what to do. And I think moving forward, one of the big things is what's going to determine whether this team moves forward is how new ownership, the Hoffman Group, how they dictate terms of how they run their hockey franchise. If they simply hand it to Kyle Dubas and say, look, you're the pro hockey guy, you're the general manager, you know what you're doing. We know you have the best interests in the heart of this team, both financially, fan base wise, et cetera, ticket sales, et cetera. If they let Kyle Dubas do that, then we're going to see a lot of moves like that. He's just going to make hard gut decisions. But if the Hoffman Group is one of those penny pinching, overstepping, no, we want to vote on everything, this team is not going to get any better. And that's exactly why Toronto's not getting any better. Because rather than having just ownership, they have to have a board. And I almost look at the Toronto franchise like it's British royalty, for Christ's sakes. You don't need a board because obviously the board made inept decisions. Look at where Toronto has been. So I think FSG having that sort of mentality the last season or two, I think was a problem for the Penguins. Because I don't think FSG understood hockey. They don't even understand soccer. All of their every franchise they pretty much own, with the exclusion of the Red Sox, has absolutely been abysmal. And this is more of a corporation that doesn't care about teams, doesn't care about the fan base. They care about finances, accolades. And so part of the worst thing that could happen to the Penguins was Lemieux selling the team. But at the same time, it was the best because it brought us who? Kyle Dubas. So there is a lot to be thankful for. So I'm not sure exactly how this is all going to fare. But the best thing that I could tell Pens faithful is don't have expectations. Yes, we want them to win. We want them to be competitive. But we don't want them to be competitive at the price of pleasing fans to bring back a 40-year-old who really probably could play in the NHL another year. Because I like Malkin. I always have. I don't like some of the shenanigans he pulls. But I wouldn't make that a necessity. That's a cut. That's like, would you like extra jimmies when you fucking ice cream? That's that type of decision. You don't come out the gate at a dinner and order dessert first. That's what Malkin wants from them. And it's just not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. I had a gut. I don't think he's coming back here. If he does, it's going to be, I would honestly tell you the truth. I think if Malkin comes back, I don't think it has anything to do with the idea of they think he's going to be hugely successful. If they do that, it's going to be to quiet the fan base, to quiet new ownership, if that's what they want. But I want to leave you with this nugget. And I think it's something that Dan Canarsie would kind of smirk at. if Evgeni Malkin was so revered, if Evgeni Malkin was considered a crucial part of this franchise going forward, don't you think Kyle Dubas would have signed him before Connor Dorr? Don't you think he would have? See, it's not what Kyle Dubas says that matters. It's what he doesn't say that does. So, probably the next time we will be together is right around draft day. Either draft day before, draft day after the fact, and obviously free agency will cover as well. And next year we are trying to do a Penguins podcast at least twice a week. At least twice a week, talk about some things, bring you guys on. But in the meantime, that was the season for the Penguins. And we'll see what happens going forward. And if anybody's interested, you can head over to Facebook, type in Pens Vlog Post Kennedy Club, and that will pop up our private Penguins page where we discuss everything Pittsburgh Penguins. And just a heads up, sort of a disclaimer, is that we are not a lily bunch. We say what we mean and mean what we say. We don't pull punches. And I do think we have the best hockey group in the world on Facebook because every single person knows the game in and out. Got a lot of former pro guys that are on the site, a lot of friends of mine that I still talk to. And so I think we have a more unique viewpoint than a lot of people. So that's going to be it for this podcast. And like I said, thank you all for joining in. If you guys are interested in Dan Canarsie, you can go to Pittsburgh Hockey Now. Not only Dan, one thing Dan does really well is when my friend Dan and I, not Dan Canarsie, but when my friend Dan and I first started, we were NHL accredited writers. We had a website. Remember that? We had the website. We were basically doing everything that Dan is doing now. But what makes me happy for Dan is that it has spread and has gotten so much bigger that now almost I think every NHL team is covered. And it's Dan's business and everything like that. And listen, might not always agree with Dan, but he's a guy I could have a beer with. And a guy I guarantee you I could have a beer with him and I could talk about Fawlty Towers with him. Because something tells me he's into British comedy. I don't know why. I think I just get it. But in the meantime, ladies and gents, summer's almost here. Draft is on its way. NHL playoffs are still underway. And we'll see what comes of this Penguins stuff. But in the meantime, be good to one another and keep your sticks down and your elbows up. Have a good one, everybody.